I am Mary Gleim. I was called a lot of things in my time. Mother Gleim, Mrs. Gleim, the murderous madam of Front Street. But I think my favorite thing that the Missoulian newspaper called me was the Queen of the Badlands. It was good to be the queen. Yes, it was. And I'm here today because there were also a lot of stories told about me. Some true, some not. I'm going to tell you the truth, at least as I remember it. In the early 1800s, a colonel by the name of John W. Johnson was posted to a fort in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. While there, he took up with an Indian woman, and they had 3 daughters. Well, when his posting was finished, he left his Indian wife and went back to St. Louis to start a new life. However, he did bring his daughters with him. The daughters were introduced into St. Louis society because Colonel Johnson was a very good businessman. He started buying up real estate in St. Louis and soon became very wealthy. Well, he remarried, and when he died in 1854, he left a daughter and a grandson who inherited his estate. The estate at that time was worth over $100,000. Now this is good, honest Yankee money. So the grandson and the daughter inherited this money. Well, guess who married the grandson? That's right, me, I did. John Edgar Gleim, my husband. He was a drinker and he was a gambler and he was kind of lazy. So I convinced him that if we got married, I'd take a hold of the family finances and I'd make him some more money, plenty of money, so he could just sit and gamble all day if that's what he wanted. Well, in the early 1880s, we came to San Francisco, and there is talk that we were in New York. I can't verify that because, I don't want to let you know too much about my past, but the railroads were coming west. And as you probably know, there was not a lot for women to do in the 1880s, unless you wanted to be a school teacher, boring, or you wanted to wash clothes for the miners, boring, or you wanted to get married and just sit at home and be a housewife, boring, boring, boring. Well, the railroads came, and it allowed women to have another profession. The brothels opened up the West. The prostitutes came, and the best customers in the early days of brothels were the railroad workers. Well, the railroad workers would bring their lanterns with them when they came. Their red railroad lanterns. And at first, they would just set them outside the doors of the brothels. That way, if there was a problem at the railroad or they needed to be found, they would be able to find them by where their red lights were. Well, if there were sidewalks in those days, they were wooden. Well, you don't want to set your lantern on a wooden sidewalk for long. If the lantern falls over, sidewalk catches on fire, brothel catches on fire, you can be caught in there with your pants down. Not a good idea. So they'd start hanging them on hooks or nails outside the doors of the brothels. This is where the term red light district comes from. Railroad lanterns. My boys. So my husband and I followed the railroad to Missoula. We came in 1888, and by 1889, I had already established myself as a sole trader, which meant all of my businesses, all of my property, all of my money, because of course at that time it was my money, it wasn't John's anymore, was in my name. I posted $10,000 in the downtown Missoula courthouse when I came to be a sole trader. Now in 1888, that was a lot of money for a woman to be tossing around. But I quickly started up buying real estate, and by 1890, I owned almost all of Front Street. There were a couple other people who owned a couple other things here, and I'll tell you about them a little later. But they were in no way rivals. They were just other people who did business on Front Street. I owned all of this. And today, if you go to Front Street, you will see there are still several of my buildings there. They have my names on them. Gleim Building 1, Gleim Building 2. But I was a businesswoman above all else. Yes, I ran brothels. Yes, I owned saloons. But I was a businesswoman. I loved to make money. I loved to keep my money. But there was one thing that I could not abide, and that was stupid people. I hated stupid people. If I was walking along the sidewalk and you were coming toward me and I thought you looked like you were stupid, well, I'd pretty much just push out of the way. Or, yeah. Of course, you know, I had a reputation. So a lot of times people would cross the street so that they wouldn't have to walk on the sidewalk next to me. Well, their loss. So, I owned businesses. I owned property. I owned property in Hamilton. Does that surprise you? Dixon. When they opened up the Flathead Indian Reservation and sold allotments up there, I was the first one up to Dixon and St. Ignatius to buy property. However, I also had a bad temper. And I would not hesitate to use that temper. Oh, excuse me for a minute. I also like to drink. I'd really, really, really like to have a drink. Excuse me. Hi. How are you? I haven't seen you in such a long time. How come you don't come and visit me anymore?
I have no money.
You have no money? Well, here. Here's a token for one of my saloons. It'll get you one drink only though. Second one you have to pay for. Okay, so there was a story. I'm going to tell you the story just because it proves how stories come down wrong over the years. The McCormick child died. And I think because we're in the cemetery, it's appropriate for me to tell this story. The McCormick child died, and I went to the rectory, the Catholic rectory, to talk to the priests about lighting a candle for the poor dead child. Well, I was well versed in many languages, Latin among them, and I asked them in conversational Latin, why didn't they have a candle out? Well, you know, those damn priests couldn't even speak Latin. Well, this just, I was just so incensed. No, I'm sorry. I was so flustered that as I turned to leave, I tripped and I fell and I clutched at the garment of the priest to try and get my balance. Do you know that he had me arrested for assault and battery? Oh, couldn't believe that. Assault and battery. All I did was faint. I ripped his robe a little bit, but I was trying to get my balance. Anyway, there was another gentleman, and I loathe to call him a gentleman, by the name of Bobby Burns. Now, Bobby owned 2 or 3 things over here, nowhere near as many as I did. Well, one night, Bobby Burns' house blew up. Dynamited, the whole house. Well, unfortunately, he wasn't in it, But I was out of town in San Francisco and I did not know anything about it, irregardless of what those two gentlemen from Fort Missoula said. I didn't know anything about it, but they fingered me. And within a couple months, I was arrested and thrown in the Missoula County Jail for attempted murder. Well, if anybody needed to be murdered, it was Bobby Burns. But anyway, I went to trial and I was found guilty. Well, the courtroom just erupted when Judge Woody said that I was to be sentenced to 14 years hard labor in Deer Lodge, the Deer Lodge Penitentiary. Well, I was not as worried as most people. In fact, someone behind me, when the sentence was read, actually said to me, "Don't worry, everything will be okay, don't get excited." And I turned to that person and I said, "I don't know who's getting excited. Most people in the courtroom are more excited than I am." Next day, I was put on a train and sent to Deer Lodge Prison. Well, I knew that I had enough money to get me off. And sure enough, 13 months later, I made a triumphant return to Missoula, where I bought drinks for everyone all around, which, you know, too bad you weren't there. Anyway, they went to retry me. Well, Bobby Burns had the good grace to drop dead of a heart attack before my retrial, so there wasn't anybody around really who could testify against me. And they found out that originally 2 of the jury members in my original trial were convicted felons themselves. So what does that tell you about the court system in Missoula in those days? Anyway, I very quickly got all of my property and my money back from my husband, John Edgar, and I just set to work again. John died. I took him back to St. Louis, buried him back there in the family plot. I don't think I missed him very much because, you know, I had the money anyway and he wasn't around. At the turn of the century, 1900s, the Missoula City Fathers, who you will see today up there if you haven't already talked to them, Mr. Woody and Mr. Sterling and Mr. Warden and Joseph Dixon. You know, I'm going to stop right here. Let me tell you a story. When I died, Fred Sterling bought a brass bed from my estate for $150. Now he's buried up there on the hill with all the other mucky mucks. But you know what? When he brought that brass bed home, his wife never slept with him again. So I'll tell you about the Missoula founding fathers. Anyway, they decided that I had a little too much influence, a little too much power. There had been stories that I was now into smuggling lace and diamonds and cocaine, Chinamen. Well, all I can say is a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do, you know. They changed the liquor laws. They changed the gambling laws. But I was all right, even though they started to close down a lot of the saloons on Front Street. I had my property and I'd already made quite a bit of money, so I was all right. Got into trouble a couple more times. So French Emma said that I tried to kill her, but you know, she drew a knife on me first. So anyway, in 1914 I died, not in a hovel as the Missoulian reported. Whatever happened to that newspaper? I'm sure they must have gone out of business. They told so many lies. I just died in a smaller apartment than might have been expected. I did not leave a will, contrary to another story that has been told about me. I had a niece and a nephew. My niece, Elizabeth Mary Gibson, is buried right here next to me. She loved me. I had a nephew, Benjamin Bone, who's buried just right down the road there a little ways. And it took them about a year to go through my estate, but I ended up leaving them about $148,000. Now in 1914 money, that's a lot of money. Now it would be a couple $1,000,000. So I left my family pretty well off. One of the other main stories about me was that in my will, I said I wanted my tombstone to sit this way in the cemetery as versus this way. And you can see as you're walking around, all the other stones go this way except mine, so that my boys on the railroad line could wave to me as they go by. Well, you know, it's a really nice story, and I don't mind, you know, but the truth of the matter is that my family erected this stone, Elizabeth and Benjamin, after I died. It cost them $750 to put this stone up, and you're looking at it right now. You know what? It's just too damn big to go the other way. This is the only way it can sit without taking up too much space. So, however, as you're driving by here on the street, during the day, at night, whatever, if you want to give me a little wave and a shout, that's okay. I'm happy to have the business. Thank you.